I stood there in a rented tuxedo from Men's Warehouse, the bow tie crooked and the cummerbund too tight around my expanding waist, while my daughter raised her champagne flute and beamed like she'd just announced a cure for cancer. $15,000 a month, she declared to the room full of tech executives and venture capitalists. That's what I send my father so he can live comfortably after all his years of sacrifice for our family. The applause rippled through the Palo Alto Country Club like a gentle wave, mixed with admiring murmurs and nodding heads. And there I was, frozen in place, a prop in designer lighting. $15,000. I drove a 2003 Honda Civic with a dashboard that lit up like a Christmas tree every time I started it. I bought generic cereal and counted coupons at Safeway. I worked overnight security shifts at a tech campus, walking empty hallways for $12 an hour just to keep my studio apartment in San Jose. Yet here I was, transformed into a lie wrapped in crystal stemware and California wine. My daughter Emma's manicured hand rested on my shoulder, but the weight pressing down on me felt heavier than her touch. At 61, you learn that the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. They come from the child you once taught to ride a bike in Golden Gate Park. And then I caught the eye of her husband, Marcus, across the room. His smile was sharp as silicon, his gaze calculating. Not warmth, not pride, a challenge. As if he knew I would stay silent, as if he was daring me to speak. But what happened next made every face in that room go pale. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. The truth is, I didn't belong in that ballroom overlooking the Stanford Hills. Not with the crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across Italian marble floors. Not with the scent of old money that clung to handmade suits and Swiss watches. My hands still smelled faintly of disinfectant from the office building I'd cleaned just hours before my shift ended. The jacket I wore pinched at the shoulders, reminding me I had no business standing among these titans of Silicon Valley. William Chen. That was my name, though it seemed to carry less weight than the paper napkins scattered across the cocktail tables. Once upon a time, it had meant something in my corner of San Francisco's Richmond district, back when I had a steady job as a maintenance supervisor at UCSF Medical Center, a small house with a view of the fog rolling in from the Pacific, and a family that looked at me with something approaching respect. Now it felt like nothing more than a convenient story my daughter could use to polish her image. I looked around the room and saw faces of people who controlled server farms and cloud infrastructures, who decided which startups lived and which died with a swipe on their tablets. They raised their glasses to my daughter Emma, who stood radiant in her black Valentino dress, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to bend algorithms and people to her will. $15,000 a month, she said again, like a golden badge of honor, like proof that she was a devoted daughter. What she actually gave me was a text message on my birthday if I was lucky, and a gift card to Target at Christmas. What she actually gave me was the humiliation of being erased from her world, except when I could serve as a prop in her performance of filial piety. Beside her, Marcus adjusted his Hermes tie and let his smile spread wider. His eyes met mine for barely a second, but it was long enough to slice something deep inside me. There was no kindness there, no recognition of shared humanity, only a flicker that said he knew I was powerless to contradict him. That man had turned ambition into an art form, and I knew instinctively that he had helped choreograph this little charade. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like a grateful smile. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I said nothing, because silence felt safer than spectacle. Silence meant I could leave with whatever dignity remained. But silence wasn't mine to keep for long. I excused myself from the circle of tech moguls and made my way toward the terrace doors. My dress shoes, borrowed from my elderly neighbor Mr. Park, clicked against the polished stone, but the noise of the party swallowed the sound whole. The December air was crisp when I stepped outside, carrying the scent of eucalyptus from the hills. I pulled it deep into my lungs, hoping it would wash away the shame burning in my chest. From the terrace, I could see the lights of the South Bay twinkling in the distance, a constellation of innovation and wealth. San Jose, Sunnyvale, Mountain View. 1,000 office parks where the future was being coded while I walked their empty corridors with a flashlight and a radio. The irony wasn't lost on me. Behind me I heard voices, Emma's laugh, bright and practiced, Marcus's smooth baritone wrapping itself around words like disruptive and scalable. Their laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses, a sound that once might have filled me with pride. Now it only deepened the hollow ache in my chest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from PG&E reminding me that my electricity bill was past due. The amount on the screen was a fraction of what my daughter claimed she showered on me every month. I leaned against the railing and thought of all the nights I'd worked, mopping floors in empty startups, watching security monitors in data centers where the servers hummed like electronic prayers, driving for Lyft until my back screamed just to make enough for groceries. The meals I'd skipped, the medical appointments I'd postponed, the small humiliations that had piled up like code commits in a failing repository. And then I thought of Emma standing there in her designer dress, her glass raised high, telling a room full of strangers she gave me $15,000 a month. It wasn't just a lie. It was theft. Because if she was telling them she gave me that money, then it was going somewhere, and it wasn't to me. Marcus's voice startled me. "William," he said softly, stepping onto the terrace. "Everything okay out here?" I turned and there he was, silhouetted in the doorway, his Tom Ford tuxedo catching the glow from inside. He stepped out with a smile that belonged in a boardroom negotiation, all surface polish over calculated intent. "You look a bit overwhelmed. Maybe the champagne hit harder than expected." I shook my head. "I don't drink." He tilted his head, studying me like a product manager examining user metrics. "Emma worries about you, you know. She's always talking about how generous she is with you. Sometimes I think she gives too much. Too much." The words nearly made me laugh out loud. "I haven't received a penny," I said carefully. "Not a cent of that allowance she talks about." His eyes flashed for just a moment. Surprise, maybe, or recalculation. Then he smiled again, smooth and practiced. "Oh, William, perhaps you're confused. At your age, it's easy to lose track of financial details. You know how these tech transfers work. Everything's automated these days." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I may be tired, Marcus, but I'm not senile. I balance every dollar because I have to, and I know exactly how much I receive, which is nothing." His smile thinned, and his voice cooled. "Well, perhaps Emma has set up some kind of investment account, some trust you don't see directly. She handles all the financial optimization. You should be grateful for that level of care." Grateful. The word hung between us like malware waiting to execute. He leaned in then, so close I could smell the expensive cologne on his neck. "Family reputation is everything in this industry, William. It would be such a shame if anything disrupted that narrative." Then he walked away, his Italian leather soles clicking against the stone, leaving me with the echo of a threat wrapped in venture capital speak. When I returned inside, the party was shifting into its final phase. Guests were finishing their artisanal desserts, and conversations were softening into farewells. Emma caught my eye across the room and smiled at me, a founder's smile that never quite reached her eyes, practiced from 1,000 pitch presentations. I collected my coat and left without another word. The drive back to San Jose was long through the winding hills of Highway 280. My Honda wheezed and rattled with every incline. The heater barely worked, useless against the December chill that seeped through gaps in the weather stripping. I climbed the stairs to my studio apartment and stepped into the familiar smell of instant ramen and loneliness. The walls were thin, the carpet worn, and the ghost of pine sol still clung to my jacket from the morning's cleaning shift. On the kitchen table sat a stack of bills arranged in the order I would have to negotiate payment plans for them. PG&E, rent, car insurance, groceries, each one heavier than the last. I sat down and opened my laptop, logging into my Wells Fargo account. Even though I already knew what I would find, the numbers glowed on the screen. $247.83. No mysterious deposits, no hidden investment accounts, no $15,000. The truth was brutally simple. My daughter had built her reputation on a lie, and I was the body she draped it over. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in my Murphy bed, staring at water stains on the ceiling, my thoughts churning like code in an infinite loop. Memories surfaced unbidden. Emma at 7, sitting on my shoulders at the Exploratorium, laughing as she reached for the Tesla coil. Emma at 18, clutching her Stanford acceptance letter, her eyes full of dreams I'd promised myself I would help fund. Emma at 25, pitching her first startup in my kitchen, asking for seed money I didn't have but somehow scraped together anyway. I had given her everything, every overtime shift, every sacrifice, every dollar that should have gone to my retirement. I had mortgaged my future for her possibilities. And now, at 61, I was left with debt and deception while she stood in tuxedos and toasted to lies. I realized something then, something cold and sharp that cut through the fog of exhaustion. Silence was no longer an option. They thought I would stay quiet because I always had. Because fathers are supposed to swallow their pride for the sake of their children. Because men like me fade into the background while others take center stage. But this time, I wouldn't. The alarm went off at 5 a.m., as it always did. I pulled on my Dickies uniform, polyester that made me invisible to every tech worker who would walk past me later. My body ached from the Murphy bed, but my mind buzzed with something new. I drove through the empty streets to the office complex where I worked security, a gleaming monument to venture capital in downtown San Jose. As I walked the corridors, checking door locks and badge readers, I found myself rehearsing questions. Where had the money gone? What proof did Emma have? Could it be traced? My footsteps echoed in the marble hallways where million-dollar deals were made during business hours. Georges, a fellow security guard, noticed the tension in my shoulders during our shift change. "Long night?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Something like that." Tell me, Georges, if someone claimed they gave you money every month but you never saw it, what would you call that? He frowned, adjusting his radio. Fraud, man. Either tax fraud if they're lying to the IRS, or theft if they're keeping money meant for you. Why are you asking? His words stuck in my head as I drove home. Fraud. Theft. Words heavier than betrayal. Words that carried legal consequences. And I knew in that moment that this was only the beginning. That night, I sat at my small table with a composition notebook open in front of me. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Monthly allowance. What really happened?" I wrote down every detail I could remember from the party, every word Emma had said, the look in Marcus's eyes, the exact phrases he had used on the terrace. By the time I set my pen down, 3 pages were filled. The story was no longer just in my head. It was on paper, real, undeniable. I looked at my handwriting, still steady despite everything, and felt something stir inside me. Not despair, not confusion, but something colder, something more determined. Resolve. For the first time in years, I felt truly awake. Emma and Marcus believed they had silenced me, but they had only given me a reason to speak. And when I did, I would make sure their words, their lies, became the code that would crash their carefully constructed system. Because what they didn't understand was that I had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous user in any system. I woke with the taste of disinfectant still in my throat, and the memory of crystal chandeliers floating above my head like cold stars. The notebook waited on the table where I'd left it open to the words I'd written in the dark. Monthly allowance. What really happened? I read the line again and felt the same quiet heat that had carried me through the night. The kind of heat that doesn't shout or rage, it just hardens into purpose. I made coffee, black and bitter, and decided that today I would stop being the man who stood there and let a lie wear his name. The morning belonged to the security job, as it always did. Badge readers to test, parking lots to patrol, incident reports to file. I walked the empty corridors of the tech complex while the building hummed with the sound of servers and HVC systems. Habit doesn't care if your heart is breaking. It just asks for your hands and takes them. During my lunch break, I found myself in the parking lot talking to Maria Santos, who cleaned the executive floors. She'd been in the Bay Area longer than me, raised 3 kids on a housekeeper's salary, and had the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "You seem different today, Mr. Chen," she said, unwrapping a sandwich she'd made at home. "Something weighing on you?" I wanted to lie, to say everything was fine and ask about her grandson's coding boot camp. Instead, the words tumbled out. "Maria, say a man stands at a party and listens to his own daughter brag about giving him money every month. Say the man never saw a penny of it. What would you call that?" She didn't answer right away. Her expression shifted, and I could see her mental filing system cataloguing the information. If the money is supposed to be for you and someone else takes it, that's theft. If she tells people she supports you to make herself look good or get tax benefits, that's fraud. Sometimes it's both. She paused, studying my face. "Why are you asking?" I shook my head and took a bite of my own sandwich, peanut butter on day-old bread. "No reason. Thank you." She touched my arm gently. "If you need help figuring something out, my nephew works for a law firm in Palo Alto. He knows about elder law, financial abuse. Good people." I nodded and filed that information away. When my shift ended, I didn't drive home. Instead, I headed to the San Jose Public Library, a place I'd always loved for its democratic quiet. No badges required, no dress codes, just knowledge waiting to be accessed. I found a computer terminal in the corner and began searching. Elder Financial Abuse, California. Dependent support documentation, claiming parent without providing support. The results were heavy with legal terminology, some of it beyond my understanding, but the patterns were clear as code comments. If a person claims a parent as a dependent, they must provide more than half that parent's support. If they document support that never reaches the parent, that's fraud. If the parent is elderly, California law treats it as abuse. There were phone numbers to call, guides for gathering evidence, instructions for documenting everything. I printed what I could and drove home with a folder full of information. The studio apartment felt different when I walked in, not smaller, but somehow more significant. Like a command center instead of just a place to sleep between shifts. That evening I opened my laptop and began typing. Not an angry rant, not an accusation, but a simple statement of facts. I wrote about the party, the announcement, the disconnect between claimed generosity and lived reality. I wrote about the Honda with 200,000 miles and the PG&E bill I couldn't pay on time. I ended with a question. If your child claims they support you, but your life suggests otherwise, what would you do? I posted it on Reddit, in a forum for people dealing with family financial issues. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments from dozens of people who recognized their own stories in mine. Adult children who had claimed elderly parents on tax returns while providing minimal support. Parents who had been used as props in their children's success narratives. Siblings who had discovered money meant for aging parents being diverted elsewhere. One comment stood out from a user named TechLawyer415. This sounds like a classic case of dependent support fraud. If you're in California, you should document everything and consider filing a complaint. The state takes elder financial abuse seriously. I read the responses until my eyes burned. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just about Emma and Marcus and their lies. It was about a pattern, a system of exploitation that operated in the shadows of family loyalty. The next morning, I called the number Maria's nephew had given her. The law firm of Patel, Wong & Associates had an office in a modest building on University Avenue in Palo Alto, close enough to the venture capital firms to understand their language, but far enough away to maintain perspective. Sarah Patel met with me 2 days later. She was younger than Emma, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen enough cases to recognize patterns. Her office smelled like coffee and determination. "Tell me what happened," she said simply. I told her. I didn't try to make it dramatic or sympathetic. I just laid out the facts like documentation in a bug report. The party, the announcement, my financial reality, Marcus's implied threats. I showed her the printed pages from my research, the notebook with my handwritten timeline. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me the way a systems administrator studies error logs. "This is strong," she said finally. "Not because of any single smoking gun, but because of the pattern. The public claims of support, the absence of actual financial assistance, the apparent diversion of funds, the intimidation when questioned." She tapped her pen against the desk. "If we want to pursue this, we can, but we need to be smart about it." "What does that mean?" "It means we gather more evidence. We don't give them time to destroy records or create false documentation. We document every interaction, and we prepare for them to fight back, hard." I thought about Marcus's words on the terrace, his smile that belonged in a hostile takeover. "They'll try to make me look confused, won't they? Claim I'm losing my memory?" Sarah nodded. "It's the standard playbook, but we have advantages they don't expect. You're articulate, you document everything, and you're not asking for sympathy, you're asking for accountability. That resonates." We spent the next hour developing a strategy. Document all communications, request proof of the claimed support, gather evidence of the actual financial situation, keep detailed logs of every conversation. When I left her office, the late afternoon sun felt different on my face, warmer despite the December chill. For the first time since the party, I felt like I had allies instead of just anger. That evening, I sat down and wrote another post. This time I included more specific details about the documentation process, the questions family members should ask, the warning signs of financial manipulation. I ended with a simple message: trust, but verify, even with family, especially with family. The response was even larger than before. People began sharing their own stories, their own questions, their own discoveries. A woman in Sacramento whose son claimed her Social Security while she lived in poverty. A grandfather in Fresno whose daughter-in-law had convinced him to sign over power of attorney and then drained his accounts. But the message that stopped me cold came from an unexpected source. The username was StartupFounder23, and the post was timestamped at 2:17 a.m. "I think I know who you are, and I think you don't know the whole story. Some of us are just trying to build something meaningful while taking care of family obligations. Maybe we should talk before this gets out of hand." I stared at the screen for a long time. Emma had found me. She was reading my words, seeing her life reflected in strangers' comments. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to pour out years of frustration and disappointment, but Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. "Document everything. Don't give them ammunition." Instead, I screenshot the message and saved it in a folder labeled Evidence. Then I closed the laptop and prepared for the next phase of a war I'd never wanted to fight. Because what Emma didn't understand was that building something meaningful shouldn't require standing on someone else's grave. And family obligations work both ways. The message from StartupFounder23 sat in my inbox like a virus waiting to execute. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the screenshot to Sarah and continued with the documentation process she'd outlined. Every text message saved, every phone call logged, every financial record copied and filed. 2 days later, Emma called directly. Her voice carried that carefully modulated tone she used in investor meetings, friendly but controlled, warm but professional. "Dad," she said, and the word felt strange coming through my phone speaker. "I saw some posts online that sound like they might be about our family. Are you okay? You seem stressed." I kept my voice level. "I'm fine, Emma. Just asking some questions about financial arrangements." "What kind of questions?" The temperature in her voice dropped by exactly 2 degrees, still professional, but with an edge that suggested terms of service violations. "About the $15,000 a month you told everyone you give me. I was wondering where it goes." Silence. Then the sound of her breathing, probably while she pulled up spreadsheets or consulted with Marcus in their glass-walled office overlooking Sand Hill Road. "Dad, we've talked about this. Your finances are complicated. We set up trusts and investment vehicles to optimize tax efficiency while ensuring your long-term security. Just because you don't see direct deposits doesn't mean the support isn't there. What's the name of this trust? Another pause. It's called the WC Family Trust. Everything is managed through our financial advisors at Goldman Sachs. They handle the distributions based on your needs assessments. I wrote down WC Family Trust and needs assessments in my notebook. Neither phrase had ever appeared in any document I'd received. I'd like to see the paperwork, I said. Trust documents, statements, anything that shows this account exists. Dad, you're getting worked up about technical details that don't concern you. The important thing is that you're taken care of. Marcus and I have made sure of that. The way she said taken care of made it sound like a threat wrapped in filial duty. If I'm taken care of, why am I working security shifts at 61? Why am I buying generic cereal and counting coins for laundry? Those are choices you made, Emma said, and for the first time, her corporate composure cracked slightly. We offered to move you to a better apartment. We offered to get you a newer car. You said you preferred independence. I tried to remember those conversations and couldn't. What I remembered were suggestions about assisted living facilities and comments about how my current lifestyle was unsustainable and concerning. Never offers of direct help, always suggestions about how I should change to accommodate their narrative. Emma, I said slowly, I need to see documentation of this trust. Bank statements, investment reports, something with my name on it that shows where $15,000 a month has been going for however long you've been claiming this. You're being paranoid, Dad. This is what happens when people start reading conspiracy theories on the internet. Marcus warned me this might happen. Marcus warned her. As if my desire to understand my own finances was a predictable bug in the system they'd designed. I'm being thorough, I said. If the money exists, proving it should be simple. The line went quiet for nearly 30 seconds. I could hear keyboard clicking in the background, probably Emma searching for a response that wouldn't create legal liability while maintaining plausible deniability. I'll have our wealth management team prepare a summary, she said finally. But Dad, I need you to stop posting things online. It's unprofessional and it reflects poorly on the company. Our investors are starting to ask questions. There it was. The real concern wasn't my welfare or our relationship. It was brand management. Their reputation in the venture capital ecosystem depended on the narrative that Emma was a devoted daughter who took care of family while building the future. My visible poverty threatened that story. I haven't mentioned your name or the company in anything I've written, I said. But people are connecting dots. This is a small community, Dad. Everyone knows everyone. If this gets back to our Series B investors... She trailed off, probably realizing she'd revealed more about her priorities than intended. I'll wait for the documentation, I said. But Emma, I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want to know the truth about my own life. She hung up without saying goodbye. I immediately called Sarah and played back the conversation from memory while she took notes. The fictional trust name, the non-existent wealth management team, the admission that investors were asking questions about something that should have been a private family matter. She's panicking, Sarah said. People don't create elaborate cover stories unless they're trying to hide something significant. And the fact that their investors are concerned suggests this isn't just personal fraud. It might be material misrepresentation to business partners. What happens next? We give them a reasonable amount of time to produce the documentation they promised. If they can't, and they won't be able to, we have grounds for a formal complaint. But William, I need you to be prepared for this to get ugly. Once we file, there's no going back to family dinners and pretending everything is normal. I thought about the last family dinner I'd attended, Emma's housewarming party for their new home in Los Altos Hills. I'd brought a bottle of wine from Trader Joe's and felt underdressed in khakis and a polo shirt, while everyone else wore clothing that cost more than my monthly rent. Marcus had introduced me to people as Emma's father, without mentioning my name, as if I were a pet or an accessory. Sarah, I said, I don't think things have been normal for a long time. I've just been pretending they were. That evening I wrote another post. This time, I focused on the psychological aspects of family financial abuse, how victims often collaborate in their own exploitation because questioning it feels like betraying love itself. How the desire to believe your family cares about you can blind you to evidence that they're using you. The responses were different this time, more personal, more painful. Adult children admitted to claiming parents they barely supported. Elderly parents described years of wondering why they felt broke, while their children bragged about their generosity. Social workers shared stories from the field about how common this pattern was. One message stood out, from someone with the username Silicon Valley Whistleblower. I work at a venture capital firm in Palo Alto. What you're describing is more common than people think. Founders often inflate their personal expenses, including family support, to justify higher salaries or demonstrate their character to investors. If you're who I think you are, you should know that your daughter's company is raising a significant funding round, and reputation matters more than revenue at this stage. I screenshot that message too. The pieces were starting to form a picture bigger than just personal betrayal. Emma and Marcus weren't just lying to me. They were potentially lying to investors, using my supposed support as evidence of their moral character while raising millions of dollars. The next morning I woke to 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. The voicemails were from Marcus, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "William, we need to talk. Now, before you do something that destroys everything Emma has worked for. I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you don't understand the bigger picture. There are legal implications here that could hurt everyone, including you. Call me back in the next hour, or I'm coming to your apartment." I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemails to Sarah and asked her to make sure they were preserved as evidence. Then I double-checked that my door was locked and waited. Marcus arrived at 3:47 p.m, according to the timestamp on my security camera app. I watched through the peephole as he stood in the hallway wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my annual car insurance. He looked like a venture capitalist who had just discovered a critical bug in the system he'd designed. He knocked, not aggressively, but with the persistence of someone who was used to doors opening when he wanted them to. "William, I know you're in there. We need to resolve this before it gets out of hand." I spoke through the door. "There's nothing to resolve, Marcus. Emma promised documentation of the trust. I'm waiting for it." "Forget the trust," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Let's talk about what you really want here. Is this about money? Because we can work something out. A consulting arrangement, maybe. Something that gives you regular income while protecting everyone's interests." A consulting arrangement. He was offering to create the very financial support they'd been claiming existed all along, but only now that I'd called their bluff. "I want the truth," I said, "about where the money has been going, about whether this trust ever existed, about how long you've been using my name to enhance your reputation." I heard him sigh through the door. "William, you're thinking like this is personal. It's not. It's business. Emma built her company from the ground up. She employs 47 people. She's developing technology that could revolutionize supply chain management. Do you really want to destroy all of that over some accounting discrepancies?" Accounting discrepancies. He'd reduced years of my struggle to a euphemism worthy of a corporate press release. "I want to understand why my daughter stood in a room full of people and said she gives me money that I've never received," I said. "If that's an accounting discrepancy, then show me the books." He was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear him cycling through different approaches, different offers, different threats. Finally, he played what he probably thought was his ace card. "If you keep pushing this, William, we'll have to question your competency. Emma is concerned about your mental state. These paranoid posts, these accusations, they suggest someone who might need help managing their affairs. We wouldn't want to do that. But if you force our hand," there it was. The guardianship threat. The nuclear option that would strip away my independence and give them legal control over my life and finances. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I've been documenting every conversation, every promise, every threat. I have witnesses, legal counsel, and a paper trail that shows exactly who has been competent in this situation and who hasn't." I heard his shoes shift against the hallway floor. "You're making a mistake, William. Emma loves you. We both do. But love has limits when it comes to protecting everything we've built. Then I guess we'll find out where those limits are." He left without another word. I watched through the peephole until he disappeared into the elevator, then immediately called Sarah to report the conversation. "He just admitted to fraud," she said, her voice sharp with excitement. "The offer to create a consulting arrangement proves they know no legitimate support has been provided. And the competency threat? That's intimidation, possibly extortion. What do we do now?" "Now we file. I have enough evidence to request a formal investigation. William, are you sure you're ready for this? Once we pull this trigger, your relationship with Emma is probably over." I thought about Emma as a little girl, how she used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her stories about brave princesses and noble quests. I thought about the woman she'd become, standing in crystal light, telling beautiful lies to buy herself credibility she hadn't earned. "Sarah," I said, "I think it's been over for a while. I just didn't want to admit it." The next morning, I woke to find my Reddit post had been shared on Hacker News, then picked up by a tech blog, then mentioned in a newsletter about startup culture. Suddenly, hundreds of people were reading about family financial abuse in Silicon Valley, and my story had become part of a larger conversation about the ethics of the innovation economy. Emma called at 6:23 a.m., her voice tight with panic. "Dad, what have you done? Our investors are pulling out. The board is calling emergency meetings. Marcus says we might lose everything." For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been satisfaction. Not joy, not revenge, but the quiet pleasure that comes when a system finally produces the output it deserves. I told the truth, Emma. If that destroys everything you built, maybe it wasn't built on solid ground. She was crying now, or at least making the sounds that pass for crying in startup pitch presentations. Please, Dad, please fix this. I'll do anything. I'll give you real money, I'll buy you a house, I'll set up a real trust. Just please make this stop. It's too late for that, I said gently. The truth is out there now. It has its own momentum. But I'm your daughter, she whispered, as if genetics were a get-out-of-jail-free card that could override years of exploitation. Yes, I said. You are, and I'm your father, which means I taught you better than this. I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside my window, the sun was rising over San Jose, painting the tech campus where I worked security in shades of gold and possibility. In a few hours, I would walk those corridors again, checking locks and testing badge readers, but I would walk them as a man who had chosen truth over comfort, accountability over peace. The war was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something worth winning. 3 weeks later, Emma's company announced that it was restructuring leadership and that she would be pursuing other opportunities. Marcus left the Bay Area entirely, reportedly accepting a position with a venture firm in Austin. The WC Family Trust, as expected, never materialized, but the investigation Sarah had requested did, along with subpoenas for financial records that revealed exactly where the claimed support money had actually gone. Luxury car payments, spa treatments, mortgage payments on their Los Altos Hills home, and something called MC Consulting Services, which turned out to be Marcus's personal LLC. The district attorney's office in Santa Clara County took a special interest in the case when they discovered that Emma and Marcus had claimed me as a dependent on their tax returns for 3 consecutive years, deducting $180,000 annually in elder care expenses while I qualified for food stamps. The tax fraud alone carried potential prison time, but the elder abuse charges made it a felony that could destroy their careers permanently. I testified in front of a grand jury on a Tuesday morning in March. The room was smaller than I expected, filled with ordinary people who looked like they could have been my neighbours or co-workers. I told them about the party, about the years of struggling to pay rent while my daughter claimed to be supporting me lavishly, about the threats and intimidation when I started asking questions. When the prosecutor asked me what I wanted to happen, I surprised myself with my answer. I want other parents to know they don't have to be ashamed of their children's lies, and I want other children to know that using family as props has consequences. Emma and Marcus were indicted on multiple counts. The media coverage was extensive, not because the amounts were large by Silicon Valley standards, but because the story touched something raw about family, ambition, and the cost of maintaining facades in a culture built on perpetual performance. Emma wrote me one letter from county jail while she awaited trial. She apologized, said she had gotten caught up in the pressure to succeed, that Marcus had convinced her the tax benefits were legal grey areas rather than outright fraud. She asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive her. I wrote back and told her forgiveness wasn't something I could give or withhold like venture capital funding. It was something that grew over time, in the space between people who were committed to truth-telling. I said I hoped she would use her time to figure out who she wanted to be when the cameras weren't rolling. She pled guilty to tax fraud and elder financial abuse. Marcus pled guilty to conspiracy and money laundering. Emma got 2 years in minimum security prison and 5 years of probation. Marcus got 3 years and was ordered to pay full restitution, which turned out to be more than $300,000 when you included interest and penalties. I used some of the restitution money to pay off my debts and put a down payment on a small house in Campbell, not far from where Emma and I used to get ice cream when she was young. I kept working security for another year, not because I had to, but because the routine and the honest work felt like a form of meditation. The Reddit posts evolved into a blog, then into a book about family financial abuse that was published by a small press in Berkeley. I donate the proceeds to legal aid organizations that help elderly people navigate financial exploitation cases. The book isn't a bestseller, but it found its audience. The invisible people who clean office buildings and drive ride shares and wonder why they feel so alone in families that claim to love them. I speak occasionally at senior centers and community colleges, not as someone who won a great victory, but as someone who learned that silence protects the wrong people. I tell audiences that documentation matters, that questions are not disloyalty, that love without honesty is just performance art. Maria Santos introduced me to her book club, and I found myself part of a community of people who had lived full lives and weren't interested in pretending otherwise. We read novels about complicated families and discussed them over coffee and homemade tamales. Sometimes the conversations were more honest than anything I'd heard in years of polite family gatherings. On my 63rd birthday, I got a card from Emma. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting. Inside, she had written, "I'm learning to build something real, instead of something that just looks successful. Thank you for showing me the difference." I kept the card on my refrigerator for a while, then filed it with the other documents from that period of my life. Evidence of pain, evidence of recovery, evidence that people can change if they're willing to face the cost of who they've been. The last time I wrote about the experience, I ended with these words: "The truth doesn't care about your startup's valuation, or your family's reputation, or your fear of being alone. It just sits there, patient as code, waiting for someone brave enough to execute it. When you finally do, you might lose some things you thought you needed, but you'll gain something more valuable. The ability to sleep at night, knowing you didn't trade your integrity for someone else's applause." The house in Campbell has a small garden where I grow tomatoes and herbs. The Honda finally died, and I replaced it with a certified pre-owned Prius that starts every time. I volunteer at a local non-profit that helps seniors with technology, teaching people my age how to protect themselves from online scams and family financial manipulation. Sometimes, driving through Palo Alto or Mountain View, I see young entrepreneurs in coffee shops, laptops open, dreams blazing in their eyes. I want to tell them that success built on lies is just failure, with better marketing. That the people who love you are not products to be leveraged or stories to be optimized. But mostly, I just drive home to my small house with its paid-off mortgage and its garden full of vegetables that grow whether anyone applauds them or not. I water them, tend them, harvest them when they're ready. It's honest work, the kind that doesn't need an audience to be worthwhile. And that, I've learned, is the only kind of work that lets you sleep peacefully at night. The end. If you've read this far, you already know what I'm asking. If you suspect someone is using your name for their financial benefit while you struggle, ask for documentation. If someone performs generosity for an audience while ignoring your actual needs, question the performance. If shame is the only thing standing between you and the truth, set it down. Shame is a poor advisor, and fear is worse. Document everything. Ask direct questions. Bring witnesses. And remember, families that depend on lies to stay together weren't really together to begin with. The truth might break some things you thought were precious, but it will also free you to build something real in their place.